Hello there, I'm Kathy Blixer. I've known Joe Swenson for a few years now. He plays some important roles in my life. He's a mentor and a Reiki instructor, and I've taken Reiki 1 and 2 from him. He was recently the chairperson of an event with nearly 1,000 attendees, and I was the treasurer for that, so I've had a lot of opportunity to work very closely with him. After working so closely with him and hearing a few of his stories, I asked him to come to speak to MUFON, as many people here would appreciate his experiences. Joe says he started researching man-made UFOs at age 13 when he heard an engineer, a pilot, and an attorney discussing the ones that they saw. Joe was an electronic computer field service engineer and has degrees in electronics and computer programming. He has a background in government programs, which are usually considered to be conspiracies, and his talk today will include information about many of those. He will take questions afterwards, and are you taking questions during?
I can.
Okay. Afterwards, you said, though. Okay, and he's also built a UFO for us, right here. Please welcome Joe Swenson.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Okay. I have water. I'll be taking breaks to get water because of a health issue. This is typically what I use. I use the Orion Consulate Department of Technology Transfer. So that anyone here who wants to dismiss what I have to say can, which I believe is quite common. The Orion Consulate is from my son-in-law. He won the rights to that name against Paramount Pictures in international court. So that's why we use it. And we're going to talk about technology. And part of the premise that they had in that for the technology transfer department was that everything is already done. In other words, you can transfer technology if they've all already stumbled across it. So a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about today are from actual patents and from actual textbooks. So let's go to the next slide. How far is Mars? Near 57.6 million kilometers. Would you believe we can get there in a day? I think it's amazing. The far distance takes a little bit more than a day. It's 100.7 million kilometers. Let's move on to the next one. For those of you that are not scientifically oriented or math oriented, this is basically the equation to figure out how to get how much speed we need. If we accelerate at 1.25 g, we can get to Mars at its nearest point in a day. But one of the things that we have to remember is at our midpoint, we have to turn around and accelerate in the opposite direction so we aren't going too fast and go right by Mars. Now, there are some technologies that allow us to do this. How do we get to space? Do we use a rocket? Or do we fly? Well, if you think about a rocket, does anyone here from NASA? No? Okay. Anyone? Well, Air Corps. You know about rockets, okay? We've heard about them. They went to the moon in '69. But you know, really, what a rocket is? It's a bomb that you're exploding, controlled, underneath you to go somewhere. When you run out of fuel, there's nothing you can do. That's it. And I'd really not like to explode on top of a bomb to get into space. The other way, Wernher von Braun suggested we fly. And he had spaceplane designs that he talked about back in the 1960s, early 1960s. The model you see over here, this is an 8-foot model of what we have over here. I call it a dart. It was given to me, the design essentially was given to me by an aeronautics engineer who worked on the Avro Aerocar. You've heard of that, you know, never got off more than 6 inches off the ground but crashed from 30,000 feet. He put his hands together and he said, what you want is you want a wedge. So that's what that design is. Now that design, at 20 miles an hour, we had it strapped to a trailer. The trailer was loaded with metal, scrap metal. The friend who built that one brought it over to a convention that we were doing. At 20 miles an hour, the trailer lifted off the ground. When we weighed the trailer afterwards, the trailer had 1,200 pounds in it. Okay? We kept it up in Fargo. We had it staked to the ground. You know, the dog stakes that you twist in. We had 3 of those. And we had a 40-mile-per-hour windstorm up in Fargo. The vehicle took off and crashed into the second story of a house and destroyed some of the siding on it so that we had to repair. And so that model was destroyed for obvious reasons. We couldn't control it. So what I made the model off to the left here. And that model, I guess is your right, my left. Stage right. Okay. That model is an updated version of the other one. It should have taken me 3 days, but because of health issues, it took me 3 months. So that'll tell you where I am with health-wise. But what we've got is we've got a full-body canard. Now, most planes, if we've got pilots here, they know about canard wings and how the canard wing will slow down the stall speed so it doesn't stall as quickly. Anyway, the big model up there weighed about 100 pounds total. And just for reference here, I don't have a slide for this because I was looking it up later. The Piper Cub has a gross weight of 1,220 pounds that it can work. So there you've got something that's just 8 foot that can do the same thing as a Piper Cub for lifting. And let's see, I don't have rate of climb for this yet because we haven't got any motors into it. The same aeronautical engineer that I was telling you about came up with this design that curved around the back of the vehicles that added more miles to the gallon for it. And that design has been re-implemented, reimagined into the rear of the vehicle. And what it does is it takes any headwind or crosswind thrust and adds it to the thrust of the vehicle. So there's a lot of aeronautics in there that you don't really see. Okay. How can we get there? Okay. I've got a quote from Ben Rich, who was the CEO of Martin Skunk Works. And this quote is so appropriate. We already have the means to travel among the stars, not the planets, the stars. But these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. So I'm talking about getting to Mars in a day. I know that. But I also know of a black project that happened in '83 that got to Mars in less than that. Got to Mars in about 5 minutes. Okay, we've got a number of types of vehicles. We've got the traditional Model T. And I call it a Model T from my experience because that's what they called it. We've got the triangular craft here. I did meet a man in black who had been on one of those and gave me some technical detail. And we also have something from science fiction, Star Trek. The only one of these that really suits the purpose of making this trip would be that one. High voltage flight. That's what the Model T runs on. Nikola Tesla probably flew one between 1920 and 1930. There is documentation out there that was acquired from Los Alamos Labs of some of Tesla's original equipment for that vehicle. And one of the books in the list will tell you how to do that and how it was made. T.T. Brown, Thomas Townshend Brown, produced a lot of patents. And some of the patents that are out there are under someone else's name who he was working for. Because he, in 1936, I believe, he was in college, and he came across electromagnetic stresses and dielectrics. And so he came up with a ship that looked somewhat like this, but all of his models were not the classic saucer type. He found that in a vacuum, using electrostatics, the vehicle would fly over 3,000 kilometers per hour. One of the more recent uses of the electro technology is something that we call the B-2 bomber. When it is in its stealth mode flying, the engines on board the B-2 bomber, the jet engines, actually are throttled back and they become magneto-hydrodynamic generators, or MHD generators. And they use that, about 5 million volts, to create a gravity hole in front of it and a gravity hill behind it to fly it. And by vectoring the voltage, they vector the flight pattern. Okay. Well, this is kind of how the Tesla saucer was done. Gives you a little bit of an idea about it. Like I said, there's some circumstantial evidence of it. What I found in my testing of high voltage stuff, and I really don't like playing with high voltage. I've been zapped a couple of times, and you know, if you can live through it, it's really nice. You're really charged up for the next few days or months or years. People don't like it because you can come up behind them and the energy field is still there and they can feel that, and it really annoys people. This was their basic design. They had one system here that was rotational Tesla coil for the direction, and one here that provided the lift. So they separated lift and thrust on this thing. During Tesla's design, he had ceramic panels on the outside that were coated with copper. And the panels would glow orange. Now, we've never heard of orange glowing flying saucers, have we? Yeah. And this shows you how between the ionosphere and the Earth there's charge. You know about lightning. You've seen that. And it's typically about 360,000 volts between the two. And so what you're doing is you're flying within that charge with most of the vehicles here. Okay. It takes 75,000 volts to ionize the air around the vehicle. When you do that, when you do ionize around your vehicle, you can fly faster than the speed of sound without creating a sonic boom. You will lose it'll use a lot of current to do that. 125,000 volts will give you neutral buoyancy, as they call it when you're scuba diving. And it takes 250,000 volts to fly. And usually when I do this presentation, I have a Van de Graaff generator that stands about this tall, and I put a bunch of pie plates on it. I turn the Van de Graaff generator on and walk away from it so I don't kill myself. And the pie plates, one will go like this, then another one will go like that, and then the last three will go boom, 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 boom. And they'll just fly right off because it's built up enough charge. It's built up to that 250,000 volt flight capacity. Okay, these are some of T.T. Brown's patents. I know they don't look like the classic Model T UFO, do they? But T.T. Brown was working with stress and dielectrics He used high voltage DC power in his original ones. Later on, he went to AC and did some work. Oh, and I'm sorry, it's 4,000 miles per hour in a vacuum. I said 3,000 kilometers. I'm sorry, I was a little slow. But these are copies of pages out of actual patents. And if you look real close, you'll notice that it's not his name there, but that's the man who owned the company that he worked for at the time. And it's quite common for companies to take patents like that. Okay, this is the B-2 stealth bomber. As I said about the generators in stealth mode, and it's 5 million volts. What they do is they charge the outer edge here, and they charge the rear edge there to give it the flight. And by varying the charge here and here, they can control the direction of it. The ionocraft. Okay, there's on that sheet that I handed out to you, there's going to be references that you can go into the JL Nautilin site over in France, and you can actually view some ionocrafts and find out all the information you want to know about them. Now, the typical ionocraft was made and patented in '63. It was written up in Popular Mechanics magazine, and it was on the cover. And the reason he did that, Seversky did that, is no one believed him it would fly. So they wouldn't patent it. So he took it to Popular Mechanics and demonstrated it for them. And they said, well, we can't deny what we're seeing. And they wrote an article about it. And then he conveniently disappeared to a wealthy mansion somewhere. This is another ionocraft. This is something that our government has done, one of these. Usually, there is a big round glowing object there, and one here, one there, and one there. I talked with a man in black who had flown on one of these and gotten some technical information. And what he said was that it was made out of something that was lighter than aerogel. Anyone here know of aerogel? Anyone heard of it? You've heard of it? You've heard of it? You've heard of it? You know, it's a real lightweight gel. Yeah. And he was also saying that one of the things they had to do is they had to put a micro-thin layer of glass on it to stop the micrometeorite particles from penetrating it. But the whole thing, because it's this gel, acts like a great big microphone, and they can hear things from 30,000 feet of people down on the ground doing whisper conversations, is what he was telling me. Okay, the nacelle concept. You know, the sci-fi concept with the nacelles. I really have the idea that Gene Roddenberry had a lot of background when he was doing this, but he also had a lot of technical help. He had a lot of help. He had science advisors from NASA and from Caltech. And the patent here is one using ion amplification and sucking ions in to amplify it and move it forward. That's like that. This is just kind of like a ramjet type of technology. It's not really a ramjet, but it's a controlled tunnel, and they call it a nacelle. But it's using the same technology as the ionic reeds over here. It's using ions to move the air. And as you get more ions and ionize more ions, you get more ions and you ionize more ions, and it builds up to jet forces. Now, one of the previous ones to this ionic one that they had done, which is in the patent reference material, is they had used prop engines, and they put them in series so that they could gain jet speed airflows that they were looking for testing aircraft. The nacelle is basically a linear accelerator, is what it is, that accelerates particles found in the vacuum. So most of the technology that they tell you about, they talk about the Bussard collector at the front in Star Trek. And what that is that's a magnetic field to focus the heavy particles into the accelerator. So most of it, kind of fits. Nacelle 2, okay, there's the prop one there. There's basically the ion accelerator. Now, any of you who remember the old TVs with the picture tubes in them, they had ion accelerators in them also. And they used coils to direct where the ion beam went. So you would use coils like this to direct where your vehicle went on the output of it. Now you've seen this one. Okay. You've heard a lot of talk about warp drive recently, the Abercrombie effect. Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah, that too. Dyslexic, so I'm not going to be able to know it. Anyway, this design was in Star Trek episodes. This design dates back quite a few years when they actually prototyped it and knew that it worked. It's not a warp field generation. This is just ion propulsion. Warp field generation is something different. Now, we did know about warp field generation. We found out about it the hard way in 1943, but we'll move on. Options for faster travel. Victor Schaumburger developed something he called the repulsion engine. And the repulsion engine is really kind of hard to understand. You really have to know a lot of physics before you do it. Now, he did not know anything about physics. He was a forester in the Black Forest in Germany. Excuse me, the Black Forest, not Germany. Got real upset about that. But what he did is he had something he called the Trout motor, which is kind of similar to a Tesla pump. And he used his Trout motor to take air in and put it out over a bowl. Using the Coanda effect, air came down and grabbed the air that was the equivalent of the diameter of the bowl and brought that around the bowl. And if I had one of those new fans that, what's that vacuum company that has that turbo? Dyson, yeah, one of those new Dyson fans. They use the same effect. And what he did around the outside edge of his bowl is he put a venturi. Now, he said that with 1 horsepower in, you could get the equivalent of 10,000 horsepower out. What does that mean? In physics, 1 horsepower is what it takes to lift 1 pound, 1 foot. Okay? So by using some of the advantages that we were talking about, Bernoulli's principle, Coanda effect, and Venturi, he was able to go much further. He was able to get an equivalent of 10,000 horsepower of thrust. Okay. Anyone here heard of Project Rainbow? Yeah, we've got a couple hands, a couple shaking hands. Project Rainbow in 1943 is where they first found out about warping space-time. Now, Einstein had said before this in his Ideas and Opinions and in his unified field theory, which is hard to get a copy of nowadays, that what he had done is that if you disrupt the electrical and the magnetic field, you have to also disrupt the gravitational field. So that's the basis of your electrogravitics. When you disrupt those two fields, you can disrupt the gravity field and that'll disrupt the electrical or the magnetic. Or you can disrupt the magnetic and the gravity and to disrupt the electrical and so on and so on. Lear, just before he died, Lear died in a jet plane explosion, but just before that, he gave a lecture to Caltech on how they already had a teleportation system. He said you could walk into one phone booth using our current telephone system at 1963, yeah, and dial up a number, dial up the exchange where you want to go to, and transfer it over. Shortly after that, we got the fly. The technology was not exploited, but I'm sure that Roddenberry or someone that he consulted with knew about it. Gateways and wormholes. Well, on the anniversary of the Philadelphia experiment, or Project Rainbow, the hole opens up every anniversary to where you can do a lot of other experiments that you can't really do without that kind of power. And what happened during the 60s, 1963, they were working with time travel. And if anyone remembers living through the early 60s, they're also working with psychoelectronics things. And there were a lot of projects that came out like that in popular electronics and what have you. And time travel was on TV, and the time machine or the time tunnel, I think it was. And so it's continued on. Back in '83, there was a project called the Montauk Project. I don't know if anyone here has heard of the Montauk Project. Okay. Yeah, I was a control subject for that. So I have, but I was here in the Twin Cities. I wasn't there, I was here. So I have a little bit of information about that. Now with the Montauk Project, we did go to Mars. It was just opening up the portal and going there. The way the portal opens up is very similar to some of the multidimensional craft that I can get into. But we've had all these technologies, and they're there. And they continued 2003. Guess what? That was the next time they turned on the Montauk equipment. Can anyone guess when the next time will be that they turn it on? 2023. So one of the things that they were looking for was the King George scenario, where they could make George Bush King of the United States of North America. Not America, North America. So it was kind of interesting. At the time, he was, I believe, the head of the CIA. Okay, we have some books. On that sheet that you've got, I've listed some of these books. The Philadelphia Experiment by Charles Berlitz, we covered. The Montauk Project. A friend of mine up in Canada wrote this book, How to Build Your Own Flying Saucer. Now I want to tell you that his editor rewrote portions of it so that there's pieces missing.
Just the right pieces are missing.
Yes, or he modified the pieces so that they weren't quite right. But all in all, overall, it's a fairly good book on the subject. It's been out of print for a number of years. I think you can find a copy of it online if you look. Electrogravitic Systems by Thomas Falone. He talks about, among other things, the B-2 bomber. And the electrogravitics of the B-2 bomber is discussed in Janes. Does anyone know what Janes is? Yeah, okay. The Amateur Scientist by C.L. Strong. He talks about, it's a book from the early 60s, and in there's all kinds of experiments from Scientific American for the Amateur Scientist series. And there's a lot of good information in there on atmospheric electronics, how the system's put together, what the resistance is, what the capacitance is, what the inductance is, and all that kind of information. And he also has spherics, what kind of systems you would put together to test for when there were certain things of high voltage coming your way. Okay, homemade lightning. In the book Homemade Lightning, they have something called a Wilmersdorf generator. Not a Wilmshurst generator, but a Wilmersdorf generator. The Wilmersdorf generator is a high voltage generator. And it came out about the same time that Edison and Tesla were fighting over which type of power to use. And if this patent would have seen the light of day, we'd all be using DC today instead of AC. Because you were able to generate millions of volts off of something very small. And like the Tesla pump or Tesla turbine, the more dish you added, the more power you got out of it. Okay. In my quest, I was looking for ways to produce this high voltage, so you wouldn't have to carry along big batteries or anything like that, or big generators. So I looked at tapping the zero-point energy by Maury B. King. It was kind of interesting. It went into the Kashmir effect. And really what's happening with these spheres here is you've got an ionized gas, and if you utilize that properly, you can trigger a Kashmir effect to draw power out of it. The complete patents of Nikola Tesla, it's a fun read, but I'll tell you, most of us won't understand it, because things that were common in his time for machining and whatever were left out in the patents. They didn't need to be there because they were common practice. Today they aren't common practice anymore. So in order to understand it, you have to go back and research some of that common practice, where it came from, which makes it a little more difficult. And that's probably why they let that one be out there. Of course, the Space Shuttle Operator's Manual. One of the better ones that I've come across is the Feynman Lectures on Physics. This was, Richard Feynman took Einstein's office, and when he was out on the West Coast, college that he was at, I believe it was Caltech, Princeton. He did advanced studies in Princeton, but he also did Caltech out on the West Coast. And whenever he did a lecture, the college just basically shut down. Okay. One of the lectures he did, which was kind of interesting, was he flipped a switch and fired a bullet at a target. And the bullet bounced off before it ever hit the target. He was demonstrating force fields in '62, I think it was. So the technologies are out there. Understanding Physics is just a good general book. The Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments. Anyone ever hear about the Golden Book? You heard about the series? Yeah. The Golden Book of Chemistry Experiments was something that was for kids. And I first saw it in the first grade. And it was my chemistry primer for the first grade and second grade. I don't have a copy of it. It's been removed from all the library shelves. You can find it on BitTorrents. But it's a very good book. It tells you how to refine uranium, among other things. And is responsible for the radioactive Boy Scout story, where a Boy Scout wanted a chemistry merit badge, and his merit badge instructor wouldn't give it to him, so he refined uranium, and the whole neighborhood was hot. General Chemistry, that's a really good book by Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling is the guy who essentially gave us vitamin C in his research. Space-time and electromagnetism. Now, in one of the episodes of Star Trek, Data was discussing whether there were 10 or 11 dimensions to space-time. Now we're talking about mathematical dimensions. And he said, they finally said, well, if we take 11, we might as well go all the way out to 16. Well, this book was written long before that, and it talks about 16 mathematical dimensions. So the Philadelphia experiment, when they ran, they were reducing the number of dimensions that they were running, and that's how that you could travel 600 nautical miles in 10 minutes. Our the holographic universe, and classic electromagnetic fields theory. Now, Michael Faraday, in 1857, bent a beam of light with an electromagnet. And one of the interesting things about it, in order to insulate the wires for the magnet, his wife crocheted silk to go around the wires for his magnet. That just boggles my mind. But he bent a beam of light in 1857. That was the technology they were trying to use in the Philadelphia experiment. The Philadelphia experiment was also, the information was also given in a book called Magnetism, the Education of a Physicist. It's a little book that's about this thin, about that tall. Gives a lot of stories on how this was actually prototyped. The Philadelphia experiment was prototyped and demonstrated by a magician in a magic show in England during World War II. And they were looking for a way at that time, when they called him in, to make the ships invisible to the mines. Then we came about our degaussing coils, and even as recently as the late 60s, the Lexington aircraft carrier had a series of degaussing coils in it, and a series of 3 dynamo motors and 3 coils, and they were told that they could never turn those on. They had to make sure that they're always working. I get this from the head electrician on the ship at the time. They had to make sure and test them that they would always be functional, but they could never hook them together unless we were in a time of nuclear attack. Okay. These are just a few of the patents. On your sheet that was handed out, you'll find there's a lot more patents than that relate to the technology. Okay. I think that's it, isn't it? Oh, some websites. And there's websites also on that sheet. Anything else? Yes? You need a microphone. Okay. There's more sheets back there.
You mentioned twice that you talked to the men in black and you got some technology from them. So could you describe the men in black?
One of the problems I have is I have ex-NSA people who want to be my best friend. Why? Because of what I know, and to make sure I don't spill the beans about some of the stuff I know. And so I will often get them, and in order to talk to me and get me talking, they have to give me something in return. Okay?
So are they an alien race or are they human?
The men in black, these are human men in black from the U.S. that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the aliens. Yes?
Regarding Tesla,
Yes?
I saw on TV that one time that they said he either saw the future and or the past when he got shocked by lightning. You know about that?
Yes.
Or electricity?
He talks about, well, he talks about it a little bit differently than that in his notes and his notebooks. And what he talks about is he comes up with, he's a beam of light hits him in the third eye is what he talks about. And
his pineal gland?
Huh?
His pineal gland?
Right here. Right here.
Okay.
Is what he's talking about. And what he was saying was the beam of light is there, and he suddenly gets the idea for something. And he doesn't see a piece of it. He sees everything fully realized at that point in time. And so he traces the light back to see where it came from and all this stuff. And so he often said he was getting his information from Mars.
And do you think the government is going to Mars and other stars right now?
We've been to Mars.
Who went to Mars in '83?
They were some of the team on the Montauk project. Part of the Montauk project, they were trying to change the timelines, and that's the part that I monitored. And that was Tuesdays, and during my 1-hour session on Tuesdays, they shut down all air traffic to the Minneapolis airport, MSP. And what they found is they could take people from one timeline and inject them into another timeline to try and pull the timelines over. And so they were exploring a lot of timelines. So I had all these different things in my head that I couldn't tell you which one we were on until after something happened. And so you'll hear some of the people talk about, well, we're on 182B timeline, you know, and that's probably from this type of technology. But they were also, what happened is they had an IBM 360 that they were using, and they had some Helmholtz coils, and they were using jumping radar. I gotta get something here. They're using jumping radar to stimulate different altered mental states in the brain. So they're basically using these radar systems, and they had a SAGE radar system out at MSP at the same time. And they were generating this in your brain so that you would see these different states. And they were syncing up the jumps between here and there over the phone lines for time delays.
And this was what you're calling the Rainbow Project and
No, what I'm calling Montauk Project was
Montauk. Okay, so the
Project-
Rainbow Project was the Philadelphia experiment.
this in 1943.
Okay, and now we jump
They
forward
had
to
a time and psychic experiment in '63 where they came up with the jumping radar thing. And then in '83, they started recording all this information and using people's brains. And what happened is one guy, his brain just kind of went, oh, I'm thinking about something else now instead of a chair. Because one of the things that how they started out is they had the guy in the chair who was sitting in the Montauk chair focus on like a chair, like these. And they had the Helmholtz coils and stuff around his head, and they'd shoot the radar at it, and they'd take all this information, and they'd load it to a IBM 360 computer. They'd use Pascal at the time to translate that information that they received from what the guy was thinking about to put it on the computer screen. And one time, guy thought, oh, well, let's think about a time tunnel, you know, instead of a chair. Or let's think about a warp tunnel. And that's what came out. And that's what they're able to use for some of their experiments.
So in answer to my question of who went to Mars, was
Some
it
of our own.
privatized? Was it some of our astronauts?
I would say it was a military project.
Okay, thank you.
Did you say there are portals every 20 years?
Every 20 years is a cycle, you
Is
know,
it-
of a sine wave.
Is it exactly 20 years?
Yeah, it seems to be exactly 20 years.
And what determines that?
That just seems to be a natural cycle.
Okay.
It's like when I was out measuring, I took a year off to measure the electricity in the atmosphere and found out that 375 kHz was the normal frequency of the atmosphere, the mean frequency. And it varied plus or minus 50 kHz. And if we use that 375 kHz, you can make crops grow absolutely phenomenal. You can get radishes that are the size of beets, that aren't woody, and taste just like those little radishes that you like to have on, or my wife likes to have on sandwiches.
Have you got any insight into cattle mutilations and the 9/11 inside job theories?
The day after, a few days after 9/11, I was up in Fargo, and one of my contacts knew a person who was ex-CIA, and the CIA person He went up to talk to him, and I stood in the background, and the person said, well, that was a company job. It's right out of the handbook of conflict resolution. There is a handbook called Conflict Resolution. BCCA used to have a copy of it. I haven't been able to find it. It's disappeared off my computer. But you can look up conflict resolution and find some information on it.
And cattle mutilations?
Cattle mutilations, I can't tell you. I don't have any experience with that.
About the Philadelphia experiment, is it true that somebody actually wound up with their body stuck in the hull because
Yes.
they warped time and space? And would you be able to elaborate on that and maybe the experiment itself in general some?
Okay. This table is not solid. We just believe it to be solid. It's made up of space. The things we see are made up of space. We're only seeing some of it. We aren't seeing all of it. During the after the Philadelphia experiment, some of the guys who made it through, they used belts that they had to wear and frequency generators on the belt to keep them synced to our space-time. And in order to do that, they used the equivalent, which was a vacuum tube at the time, of a 555 timer or oscillator, Colpitt's oscillator, and pink noise to keep them in this. If they took those off, they would often get a faraway look on their face on the 4th floor of the VA where they were required to stay. And they get this look on their face and they just walk through the wall and disappear.
For good.
For good.
With all this secret technology, if some asteroid came around, say September, do these people have any intention of helping us to block it off?
I'm not too worried about asteroids. There was a base at L5. No, just a minute. He'll be next.
Oh, okay.
There was a base at L5, and they recently moved it. And you heard about the slow-moving asteroid that moved between the Earth and the Moon here some months ago? Well, that was the L5 base that they moved that was serviced out of the central desert of Australia. But they moved it to the L5 from the Earth-Moon orbit to the Earth-Sun orbit.
Are we in contact with alien races?
I don't know, you call the reptilians alien?
Yeah.
Okay, then we are.
Okay.
I prefer not to. We were told that if we were ever to see one, to kill it. Yeah. Yes?
Hi. So with all the technologies that are out there in these projects, it pretty much makes NASA redundant.
Yes.
So what is the purpose of NASA? Are they just totally ignorant of these projects, or are they being used as a form of disinformation to keep people from
I don't know,
looking
they
at these
keep
other
us
projects?
distracted, don't they?
That's what I'm wondering. What,
You know,
in your
if-
viewpoint, are they being used that way, or are they just
If
totally
we
ignorant?
really
of
wanted to be on Mars, Mars Direct would have had us there.
Well, I mean, they've got the Mars rover projects. I mean, they spent
Yeah, we've got the
billions
Mars
of dollars to do that. For what purpose if they didn't need to?
It's a distraction.
Yeah, Mars Direct was a pretty well-defined program. It was gave a pretty good, it was pretty economical, and it had a well-defined.
And it was destroyed by NASA.
Anything about cold fusion? Cold fusion?
Cold fusion? Yeah, we've had it. Right now, there are two major peoples that are working on it. One is in Japan, and the other is in Italy. And the cold fusion does work. It's part of something called resonant chemistry. You won't find a whole lot of resonant chemistry. It's been around for decades, but they've just started teaching it about 15 years ago. I think that's when Aaron had his class in it. And with resonant chemistry, what you're doing is you're using frequency and wave shape to either put compounds together or separate them. And it's a very simple technique. If you remember the original story of, God, it's one of my favorites too, The Day the Earth Stood Still. In there, Klaatu was healed with this abundance of noise and light. And you can use frequencies like that to heal your body of different things. You can kill a lot of the parasites in your body by using frequency. Hulda Clark did a lot of work on that, but that's another lecture. Yes?
What, is that?
Right there. I think there was one over there too.
Let's get some people on this side.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go to Mars with a spaceship like that,
I wouldn't take that one.
well, on the same principle,
I would probably use, if I were going to Mars, I would use electrostatics, and I would use a saucer-type design because the saucer shape is better for capacitors, for holding the voltage or the charge. During Roswell, they had some material that was saved from the fabric that they said was 57 alternating layers of magnesium and bismuth. The bismuth acts as a dielectric. The bismuth also is a better shield to radiation than lead. And the combination that they had it in made a huge supercapacitor of the vehicle, but it would also act as a heat pump, and as a heat pipe. And by that, it would take from the hot side of the vehicle to the cold side of the vehicle to re-radiate the energy out to save the heating that they have problems with on the space shuttles.
well, so how do they get rid of the G-forces, or doesn't that matter, or what?
You create your own G.
So you get
can
rid of
create
gravity?
You can create your own gravity.
In a field propulsion, you don't have
Yeah.
forces.
Yeah.
You basically.
I was wondering, you mentioned time travel. Did you ever meet anyone that had done time travel, and what was their experience?
Okay. I have a friend who's a chemist. He's got degrees in chemistry, physics, and mathematics, and he teaches it. And he ended up talking to himself at a convention last year in Texas from a time travel. And he was supposedly about 6 years into the future. That's the closest I can get to that for you.
Thank you. In popular ufology, if you take the Phoenix Lights and the Steubenville, Texas. Yes, thank you. So the various events in popular ufology, can you identify any of those that were our crafts?
The flap in Belgium with the triangles were ours.
My daughter-in-law's grandfather built the power plant for the Nautilus, and he and I were discussing why they used water in their reactors. And he said, well, the Nautilus, we used water. We were going to go with, was it bismuth, instead of water. And he said, we put it into the second nuclear sub, and then we took it out because we were having some problems. He wouldn't tell me what the problems were, but he said we were having some problems.
And I'm not advocating bismuth as part of a nuclear reactor system.
Right, right.
they're using the water for the cooling.
Right.
And the heat pipes themselves can overload real quickly.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of what he was running into.
Yeah. I have another question. I want you to address the TR3B's propulsion system according to what they're saying online. They're talking about mercury, bismuth, and a combination of other things inside of that circular tube.
It's interesting that you brought that up.
Okay.
I'm looking for people that have information on the mercury propulsion systems from the VMAs. Personally, I don't have any information at this time.
Let's wrap up, take a break here. We're losing battery on his lapel mic, so I'll just hand you this, and if you're wrapping up comments. And
Anything else? Are we about done?
I think we are, because we need
Lots more. Well, okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.